to welcome everyone who's joining us this morning for the clinical conversation on working with infants, young children and their caregivers who have experienced family violence. Before we move into the presentation, I'd like to acknowledge the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional custodians of the lands, skies and waterways across Australia. I'm meeting with you here today on the stolen lands of the Wadawurrung people, and I extend this acknowledgement to the various stolen lands that we're meeting here today on. I'd like to pay my respect to the elders past, present, and our future emerging leaders to come. And I'd like to pay my deep respects to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander infants, children, young people, families that we work with in the sector, but that we also have the privilege of living alongside in community. I'd like to acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues who might be joining us here today. And I'd like to acknowledge the particularly difficult time as we head into the referendum about the voice to Parliament this weekend. So my name is Kathleen Wood. I'm here from the Take Two Clinical Practice Development team. I'm going to be hosting the session today, and I'll be joined by a few of my colleagues from Take Two who I'm going to introduce as we move through the session. For those of you who might not be as familiar about Take Two is a tailored outreach clinical service that provides trauma-informed mental health services for infants, children, young people and families, and we've been operating for 20 years. We undertake multidisciplinary and systemic trauma-informed assessments to best understand support and intervene with children who've experienced trauma and disrupted attachment due to abuse, family violence, neglect or other adverse childhood experiences. Berry Street, many of you probably know, is Victoria's largest independent child and family services support organisation and is a lead partner of Take Two. And we're privileged to be supported also by VACA, the Victorian Aboriginal Childcare Association, the Mindful Centre at the University of Melbourne, and as well as La Trobe University. So this morning, for the session today, so we're going to start this morning with an overview of the principles that have informed Take Two's first relationships practice guide. And this is then going to be followed by a clinical case presentation that will highlight, I guess, the key elements of the way that we deliver infant-focused work at Take Two. The case material that we'll present is de-identified, and all of the images that we've used are stock images. I do, I guess, want to make note that during the session today, we will be talking about adverse experiences and trauma experiences that have been experienced by infants, caregivers and families. And so I would just encourage you to be mindful of this as you listen into the session today and to consider any support that you might need and that is available to you if the content brings up any distressing feelings for you. Some practicalities before we move on. You will have seen that we've muted everyone, which is just to avoid the audio distractions. However, I would encourage you to open up the chat. For those of you new to Zoom, you can just toggle down and there's a little chat button that you can click on. We'll use the chat thread throughout, so you can pop in any questions or reflections. Feel free to please introduce yourself in that space and where you're dialing in from today. My team will keep an eye on this and respond to questions as we go. But just, I guess, to acknowledge that we won't answer questions really specifically about the child or family. And just to, I guess, I have the privilege to introduce you to Take Two's latest practice guide, First Relationships. Working with infants, young children and their caregivers. This guide is a testament to the impact that the field of infant mental health has had on our understanding of the importance of early relationships, and I guess draws upon the practice wisdom of the Take Two program as well. This practice guide will be available on our website, so take2.org.au, but both it as well as a video of today's session will be sent out to you in the following week or so. This conversation today follows on from previous sessions, a previous session that we held in June, which discussed the key principles for trauma-informed practice with infants and young people. And so if you missed that session or you'd like to revisit it, it's also available on our website. For those listening live, we'll post a link in the chat that will take you to the recording. And if you're tuning in later and rewatching this, you can find a link to the recording on Berry Street's website, which is berrystreet.org.au. So that's enough from me for now. So I'm going to introduce Kirsten Williams, who'll be our first presenter for the morning. Kirsten is a psychologist and child psychotherapist with over 2 decades of experience working with families impacted by family violence and trauma. Kirsten's one of the Take Two clinical managers and is trained in child-parent psychotherapy. So welcome, Kirsten, today.
Thanks, Kat. Before beginning, I would like to acknowledge the importance of lived experience in shaping and developing practice and extend my gratitude to the babies, young children, and their caregivers who have entrusted us with their stories, and welcome you all here to this conversation. Take Two's latest practice guide has been developed to support practitioners working with infants, young children, and their caregivers who have been impacted by trauma and other adverse events. The practice guide highlights the importance of early relationships and the rapid development that young children undergo between birth and 5 years of age. A baby's brain is roughly a quarter the size of an adult's brain at birth. Within the baby's first year, their brain doubles in size. And by the age of 5, children's brains have reached 90% of the size of adult brains. Relationships matter, and the connections that babies and young children have with their parents or primary caregivers profoundly shape the development of their brains, laying the foundation for later life. Loving, attuned, and predictable early relationships provide young children with a secure base to explore their surroundings, learn about the world, and develop trust in people. Caregivers play a fundamental role in strengthening neural connections within an infant's brain. By responding attentively to the baby's expressions and engaging in attuned and rhythmic verbal and nonverbal interactions, they facilitate the development of these connections. These interactions, in turn, support babies and young children to develop complex communication and social skills. Additionally, when parents provide comfort and co-regulate their child's emotions, it supports the gradual development of their child's ability to self-regulate. Kat, I think we're ready for the next slide. When adults' responses to infants are inconsistent, inappropriate, or absent, it can disrupt the formation of the developing brain's architecture, potentially affecting the baby's physical, mental, and emotional health. This can trigger a state of chronic stress in babies and young children, where the stress response system remains activated in a fight, flight, or freeze state for prolonged periods, flooding the body with stress chemicals. Many young children, especially those who have faced traumatic or adverse life events, may experience difficulties in regulating their behaviors and emotions. It's important to recognize that these struggles are a normal part of development, but children who have experienced trauma may be particularly susceptible to them. They may be clingy or fearful of new situations, easily frightened or difficult to soothe. Some children may reenact what they have experienced or will react with aggression, hypervigilance, or impulsivity, while others may become overly compliant, avoidant, or emotionally shut down. Caregivers who experience neglect, trauma, or instability in their own childhood may experience greater difficulty in establishing and maintaining a secure and containing environment for both themselves and their children. Additionally, challenges such as mental or psychiatric illness, substance abuse, family or community violence, learning difficulties, and disadvantage can significantly impact a parent's well-being and their ability to consistently provide nurturing care, especially during the early years when babies are highly dependent. It's important to recognize that these caregiving challenges don't necessarily indicate a lack of love or intent on the part of parents or caregivers. Instead, they often stem from personal life experiences and circumstances. When parents or caregivers require additional support beyond their community and family connections, services can play a significant role in empowering families to overcome challenges and in fostering healthy early relationships. As the saying goes, it takes a village. Many people who experience traumatic and adverse life experiences go on to lead fulfilling lives. Resilience is not something you are born with, but it can be developed through a combination of protective factors, with relationships and connection to culture being key components. The healing power of connection in fostering resilience serves as a reminder that relationships and culture matter deeply. The brain responds not only to negative experiences, but also to positive ones, especially during sensitive stages of brain growth, such as infancy. When working with caregivers and infants who are experiencing relational challenges, it's important to understand their experiences, recognize their strengths, and acknowledge their difficulties. Observations of interactions between caregivers and young children is a method that practitioners can use to gain a deeper understanding of the strengths and vulnerabilities of the caregiver infant relationship. This observation driven insight can then be used to guide goal and intervention planning. The Infant Caregiver Planning and Review tool has been created by the team at Berry Street to assist in determining the potential usefulness of observation. The tool supports practitioners in considering essential consent and safety factors. It also guides assessment, focusing on key areas when setting goals with caregivers. This tool can be used flexibly and at different intervention stages when working with babies, young children, and their caregivers. The Infant Caregiver Observational Guide complements the planning and review tool. The observational guide assists practitioners in assessing and intervening by identifying recurring caregiver child interaction patterns across key relational domains. I won't go through these domains now, but if you're interested in taking a deeper look, we will be emailing these guides to people who have registered for this event. The guides will also be available on our website at www.take2.org.au. Thanks everyone for taking the time to listen today, and I'll now pass you back to Kat.
Thanks so much, Kirsten. It's really useful before we head into the clinical case presentation to hear about the principles that inform infant work at Take Two. And I'll now introduce Tamara Hamilton and Vicky Marshall, who present a de-identified case that really highlights what this work looks like in practice. So Tamara and Vicky both both work in the Restoring Childhood program, which is run by Take Two Berry Street and funded by Family Safety Victoria. Restoring Childhood works with infants, children, and young people up to the age of 18 and their caregivers who have experienced family violence. Referrals into Restoring Childhood usually come from victim survivors seeking support, can come from child or family community service organisations, child protection or other family violence services. Vicky and Tam are qualified social workers who've both got extensive experience providing therapeutic responses to caregivers and their children impacted by family violence. Tamara is a qualified child-parent psychotherapist. We'll talk a little bit about that in the presentation. She's also trained in level 2 EMDR therapy. Vicky herself also undertaking training in child-parent psychotherapy. So welcome to you both today.
Thank you, Kat. So, we're going to talk about a family that Tamara worked with using the Child-Parent Psychotherapy framework. This focuses on supporting and strengthening the relationship between the child and their caregiver as a vehicle for healing. We'll be discussing Tamara's work in a conversational style, so I'll be asking some questions, inviting Tamara to reflect on her work with this family. The family members Tamara worked with were a little girl named Georgina and her maternal grandmother, Maria. As we'll discuss, the work involved thinking about how to support the relationship between Georgina and Maria, considering Georgina's experiences of abuse and neglect, and Maria stepping into the role of primary carer, a role which she wasn't expecting to take on and which she was finding challenging. So, Tamara, when we receive referrals for families, we often receive a lot of information, including information about the family violence and child protection histories and the current concerns for the child. Would you be able to share with us some of the key points relating to Georgina's experience from the information that you had at referral?
Sure, thanks, Vicky. So Georgina was 4 years old. However, developmentally, she was perhaps more like an infant. Georgina had experienced family violence by multiple people, her father, and later by her mother's new partner, Jason. Georgina had also experienced neglect by her parents due to drug and alcohol issues, which had begun early in her life. Child protection held multiple protective concerns for Georgina. For example, the family violence she experienced, reports of neglect that Georgina was presenting to childcare with nappy rash, her hair not brushed, and dirty clothes. Further, child protection history indicated that childcare staff had worried that Georgina seemed to have great difficulty in playing with peers, that she was frequently having meltdowns, and that she was difficult to soothe when she was distressed. In the context of these concerns for Georgina's safety and well-being, she was removed from her mother's care and placed with her maternal grandmother, which was Maria. There was uncertainty about the length of time Georgina would be living with her grandmother, Maria, as Maria was hopeful that Georgina could be reunified with her mother at some point. Child Protection wanted our service to assess Georgina and support Maria to further understand Georgina's needs in the context of these protective concerns mentioned.
Thanks, Tamara. So we can see that Georgina has had many experiences of trauma and loss in her young life, and we can see her distress being communicated through various behaviours. We can also see that Maria is experiencing some challenges stepping into the primary carer role. So, in Restoring Childhood, following review of the referral information, we then undertake a comprehensive assessment. So, this involves information gathering, observation, and assessment. We try and build rapport and begin building a relationship of safety and trust with the caregiver. We meet with the carer to explore the caregiver's perspective and knowledge about the child and seek to understand the caregiver's experience of being a caregiver to this child. We undertake several play-based sessions with the child and caregiver to observe their interactions together, to see how the child communicates their needs and how the caregiver responds to this. This helps us in understanding their relationship strengths and challenges. We collect information from other services involved with the family, such as childcare, which can provide us with a different perspective of the child. And as clinicians, we consider our own emotional reactions working with the family and reflect on the impact on ourselves and what this might mean from a clinical perspective. So, Tamara, in this case, you started off with parent sessions with Georgina's grandmother, Nonna Maria.
Yes, that's right. So after I received a referral, I contacted Maria. As Georgina's primary caregiver, I wanted to build a relationship of trust and safety with Maria. I also wanted to understand more about Georgina's early life and Maria's experience of becoming Georgina's primary caregiver. I knew it was going to be important for me to have information on how Maria was parented, as this would be impacting and influencing the way in which she was parenting Georgina. We also explored strengths and difficulties of Georgina's. Another aspect of the initial call with Maria was discussing ways in which Maria thought our service might be helpful. We also discussed any relevant cultural considerations I would need to be aware of in working with Georgina and Maria. Initially, Maria was reluctant to discuss difficulties in the past. She revealed a little bit about her own experiences, like how she migrated from Italy to Australia and how her husband passed away when her own children were young. During this phase, one of Maria's main requests for support centered around how to deal with Georgina's tantrums. Maria indicated that Georgina was having daily meltdowns that were lasting for over an hour and that they seemed to be getting worse, not better. Maria discussed how Georgina would become aggressive towards Maria when upset. For example, she was hitting, kicking, and hissing at Maria when she was upset. Maria, other concerns for Georgina were around how Georgina was easily scared. This was impacting Georgina's sleep as she was having difficulty falling asleep, and she would wake screaming, saying she'd had a bad dream. But also that Georgina became distressed if she was left in a room of the house on her own, and she'd follow Maria around the house because she was scared. Maria said that Georgina was an outgoing, determined girl who was quite capable of many things. She laughed as she explained Georgina had taught herself how to ride a bike. Maria reported she loved Georgina dearly. She enjoyed her company, but at times she found herself overwhelmed with the idea of raising Georgina on her own, especially at this stage of her own life. Maria shared that Georgina was attending Italian school and they both enjoyed attending together and connecting to the Italian community. Maria reflected on having a very close and supportive, loving relationship with her parents. She discussed things like honesty, respect, and family as critical to her family and their culture. Maria spoke of feeling somewhat embarrassed that she was caring for her granddaughter, indicating she worried what people might be saying about her own daughter and her. During this phase, I assessed Maria to be a mix between flattered and shut down when thinking about Georgina's experiences. What I mean by this is Maria would become highly distressed thinking about Georgina's past traumas and then quickly slip into actively avoiding and thinking about Georgina's past. So these were some of the key points Maria shared in the initial conversations, Vicky.
Thanks, Tamara. So after some initial sessions with the caregiver, we then meet with the child and caregiver together. These sessions are play-based and child-led, and during these sessions, we are observing relational interactions between the child and caregiver, noticing how the child interacts with us as the clinician, observing how the child plays and any significant themes evident in their play, observing any emotions that arise in the child or the caregiver and how these are responded to. Understanding the strengths and difficulties in the relationship helps shape our goals for medium-term therapy. So Tamara, once you had met with Maria and gathered information about Georgina's history, Maria's worries for Georgina, and her experience becoming a caregiver, you then met with them together for a play-based observation session. So what did you observe and how did it help you understand their needs?
The dyadic observation provided me with so much information, as they usually do. A strength I noticed straight away was how Maria offered Georgina comfort through physical comfort, through fixing her hair when it fell in her face and wiping crumbs off Georgina's face. Maria had also prepared snacks for Georgina. This illustrated to me that Maria had a good capacity to think of Georgina's basic needs. At other times, though, Maria seemed to have difficulty understanding and tolerating Georgina's behaviour and general temperament. Georgina is a very active, strong-willed little girl who enjoys sharing what she likes and what she doesn't. Maria was seen to quickly become agitated by her granddaughter moving around the room, and when Georgina didn't want to do something Maria wanted her to do, Maria appeared to perceive this as an act of disrespect to her role and position in the family. She also seemed to worry that Georgina's challenging behaviour reflected poorly on her parenting capabilities.
Right, so can you give us an example of that, Tamara?
Yeah, I think a really good example of that dynamic was at the end of the session when it came time to pack up. Being a transition, it was a difficult period of time for Georgina, and Georgina became really distressed. She threw her body on the floor, and Maria responded to this by raising her voice, and she told Georgina that she was being silly, and she made threats like, if you don't get up off the floor and stop being silly, I'm going to take your iPad off you. And Georgina escalated in response to Maria's raised voice and threats, and she started hitting and kind of kicking at Maria. And then Maria responded to Georgina getting more agitated, and she raised her voice further. It's important to note that during a didactic observation session, though, I'm taking a neutral role and I'm trying not to intervene. I was undertaking specific assessment measures while I was watching, and it was clear to me that Georgina was struggling with hyperactive behaviour and prosocial behaviours. Another key thing I noticed in the observation session was how Georgina would often come to me, sit on my lap, and try and snuggle in, despite me being an unfamiliar person to her. This created a dilemma for me. I didn't want to reject this little girl who had been rejected so many times in the past, but I was also aware of the need to model healthy boundaries and around safe and appropriate behaviour with people she didn't know. I was also mindful of the possibility of embarrassing or shaming Maria as a caregiver in response to the behaviour Georgina was exhibiting. I wanted to be very careful not to embarrass Maria, as several times during the session, she had already told Georgina that she was embarrassing her already. In the room, my response to this dilemma was to sensitively invite Georgina to sit next to me rather than on top of me. Beyond this session, as I continued to work with them, I used a curious questioning approach to raise awareness of safe physical behaviour in relationships. For example, I asked, how might we greet people we know differently from those we don't know to address this issue? Overall, the observation session gave me a good opportunity to get a better understanding of the strengths between their relationship and to see where further support was required.
Thanks, Tamara. So the final component of the assessment is seeking information from other services working with the family, such as childcare or family services. Information from multiple sources can provide valuable insights into the child's presentation and behaviour in different contexts. When we speak to other services, we're keen to hear the insights and observations from hear their insights and observations of the child's patterns of relational interaction, emotional regulation, communication of needs, developmental strengths and challenges, and social skills development. In Georgina's case, the only other service involved was the childcare centre Georgina had started attending. So Tamara, what did you learn from speaking with childcare staff?
They said Georgina was having issues with peers, especially struggling to play with in both structured and unstructured activities. She was an outgoing, confident girl, but would become quickly overbearing to other kids, and she was too much physically. She became frustrated and angry at other kids when they didn't do things she wanted. So it's not that she struggled to make connections, but she was so desperate to make friends, she struggled to accept their boundaries and cues, and in return, they become irritated by Georgina's behaviour. This lack of boundaries and what we call indiscriminate affection was also the case with adults. Childcare staff reported seeing Georgina approach adults she didn't know, and she would climb into their laps, hug and kiss them. The childcare staff also noted how Georgina struggled with transitions. For example, she became distressed when it was time to move on from activities and spaces. Now, this isn't unusual behaviour for a younger child, but it was something that Georgina was still struggling with quite a lot. So the key themes that the childcare staff shared were very similar to what Maria had shared in our initial conversations and the assessments I made during the didactic observation session.
So Tamara, considering all the information gathered to this point, what were some of the significant aspects that were considered to be either hindering or supporting connection between Maria and Georgina?
First and foremost, I understood Georgina's current struggles as symptoms of distress in the context of her experiences of family violence and neglect. Further perpetuating the current concerns for Georgina were the moments of misattunement. For example, the way in which Maria struggled to hold in mind Georgina's experiences of abuse and neglect meant at times she saw Georgina as the problem and would say things like, "Stop being naughty," or "I'm sure there's something wrong with her." These moments of misattunement were happening so frequently when we first started working together that it seemed like there was a real lack of joy between Maria and Georgina. Another key theme identified was the uncertainty in Georgina's placement with Maria. Maria was hopeful that with support, Georgina's mother may return to being her primary caregiver. Contributing to Maria's ambivalence as a permanent primary caregiver was Maria's age. With Maria having discussed, she was mentally preparing for retirement, freedom, and travel, and that caring for Georgina was full time seemed to be the complete opposite to this. Considering the key themes identified and Georgina's age and stage of development, I decided to use child-parent psychotherapy to support and strengthen their relationship. Vicky, if you could share with everybody a little bit about child-parent psychotherapy?
Sure. So, Child-Parent Psychotherapy, or CPP for short, is an evidence-based therapy for young children who have experienced family violence and their caregivers. CPP considers how trauma and the caregiver's relational experiences and history affect the caregiver-child relationship and the child's development. It supports and strengthens the relationship to help restore and protect the child's mental health. It encourages connection of the child's past experiences of trauma with their current feelings and behaviours. It supports family strengths and aims to help families heal and grow after stressful experiences. So, a key element of CPP is the triangle of explanations. This acts as a visual illustration that connects the child's past experiences of trauma with their current feelings and behaviour and sets the focus for treatment. So, Tamara, could you share with us Georgina's triangle?
Sure. So Georgina's triangle looked a little bit like this. When Georgina was very little, she saw her daddy and Jason get mad. They would yell. Sometimes her daddy and Jason threw things and hurt her mummy. This was scary for Georgina and her mummy. Daddy left and Georgina and mummy moved around a lot until her mummy met Jason. Sometimes mummy would sleep all day and Georgina was left alone to look after herself. Georgina felt scared, sad, and alone. Now, when Georgina feels upset, it reminds her of the times when she was scared before, when she saw mummy get hurt, and when she was left on her own. Georgina worries she might be left again, so now she follows you around to ensure she's not forgotten about or left. Treatment will be a place for Georgina to share with us her worries and for us to work together to help Georgina feel safe, heard, and seen.
So once the triangle of explanation is established, we develop goals for therapy. So Tamara, what were the goals for your work with Georgina and Maria?
The initial goal Maria and I spoke about was wanting to address why Georgina was living with her grandmother. This felt vital, and Maria and I worked together to develop a shared narrative that helped explain why Georgina is now living with her. This was shared with Georgina in session many times through play. Further, we discussed the need to support Georgina's ability to use Maria as comfort when she was distressed, with the end goal of strengthening Georgina's understanding that she could depend on Maria consistently to be there for her. As we continued to work together, the goals continued to evolve. A key area of support that required a great amount of attention was assisting them to develop ways to repair and reconnect after conflict. This was difficult. It was difficult for many reasons. For example, Georgina would respond to Maria's disapproval with physical attempts to reconnect, which were too intense for Maria. Consequently, I knew it was going to be important to help Maria to find a way that she felt comfortable with to initiate the repair with Georgina. This looked a little bit like Maria saying, "I'm upset you did that, but you know I'll always love you no matter what." We met once a week for roughly an hour. We'd usually have a session with Georgina and Maria, and then one with Maria to check in on how she was going without Georgina in the room. But in our work, we're also thinking about what happens outside of the time that we meet together, aren't we, Vicky?
Absolutely. So there are often ways in which we're supporting the relationship outside of the therapy room through engagement with other services and agencies and thinking with the caregiver about activities that may be beneficial for the child and carer. So Tamara, can you share a little bit about what this looked like in your work with this family?
Yes, so I frequently attended meetings with the childcare centre to promote Georgina's needs and advocate for ways in which they could support her in connecting with peers and in transitioning between activities and spaces. I also attended care team meetings with child protection to help all the professionals involved in making decisions about Georgina's care hear her voice of her experience. Further, in looking for ways to build the connection between Maria and Georgina, it led us to explore cultural activities they could connect to that they both would enjoy. We also explored ways in which Georgina could burn off all that extra energy Maria frequently was speaking about and felt exhausted by. Given this, we enrolled Georgina in swimming and dancing lessons. This gave Maria an opportunity to notice and reflect on Georgina's strengths and to be in an environment where she could see her doing well. These activities were mutually enjoyable, which was important in strengthening their relationship.
So Tamara, at the end of your work with the family, what would you say the main outcomes were of the work?
Some of the key outcomes were the way in which Maria shifted away from seeing Georgina as the problem and instead consistently acknowledged Georgina's experience of violence and neglect as what was underlying her distress. I think this helped in reducing conflict between Georgina and Maria, as Maria understood Georgina's behavior differently, now as a communication of distress. So Maria was less reactive and more empathetic. In return, we saw more reciprocal joy within the relationship, which enhanced security and connection. With this enhanced security, there was improvements in Georgina's symptoms of distress. For example, by the end of our time together, she was falling asleep unassisted, and there was a reduction in night waking and nightmares. Both Maria and the childcare staff had reported improvements in Georgina's capacity to transition between tasks and activities, which was really helpful for what her day-to-day life looked like. So they were the key areas where I noticed change for this family during our time together. I'm now close with Georgina and her grandmother. I still think about them a lot and I'm hopeful they're doing well. When I closed, I felt confident that with the outcomes that we'd achieved, Maria would be able to continue to be Georgina's primary caregiver. I also learned a lot from my work with this family. I learned the importance of patience and that grief cannot be hurried. Both Georgina and Maria needed time to grieve that things hadn't gone the way they wanted. Georgina's mummy wasn't able to look after her the way she needed, and Georgina and Maria needed time to grieve this before they could find a new way to find a way to accept where things were at and to connect with each other in their new way of being together in the world. Thanks for listening, everybody. I hope it was interesting and useful. I'll hand back to Kat now, who will open the session up.
Thanks, Tam. Before you mute yourself, I knew you'd be quick fire on that one. There are a couple of questions, I guess, that I wanted to put to you. There's some questions coming through thick and heavy now that I've got my eye across. I think a really practical one just to start with, just around, I guess, and it's probably hard to have an average, but, you know, when using a modality like CPP, I guess, the number of sessions you usually might have with a family or the length of sort of time that you might have. And I know that's probably like a how long, you know, as a piece of string type question, but do you have a sense of sort of a strike of balance around that? And
Yeah, we usually work with families for roughly 6 months, and CPP has a staged intervention. So it's the initial kind of foundational phase, is that correct? And then it moves into the core and then a closure phase. So not all families move through all three phases, but so yeah, I guess it, like you said, it depends on the family that we're working with, but on average, it would be roughly 6 months.
thanks, Tam. And I feel like I'm going to direct all of these questions. So I also invite Kirsten or Vicky in to respond. Stacey was, you mentioned talking about building the trauma narrative, and I think that's language that people hear of. And I guess, and you talked about that, I guess, happening through play.
Mm-hmm.
What does that actually mean? Like, what does that actually look like for those, I guess, people who aren't doing that particular type of work?
So again, it depends on the family and the narrative that it needs to be developed. But I think what we kind of touched on is the importance of those initial sessions with a caregiver, where we develop that shared narrative with the caregiver, because we want to ensure that the caregiver is very familiar with the information that we're going to share with the child and feels comfortable with that information as well. So we know language is very important, and we want to use language that feels comfortable or right for that family. So we probably start that narrative around where they're at. Like for this family in particular, it was about trying to make sense of why they were in this position and being able to then share this with Georgina.
Thanks, Tamara.
I think I'll just add to that as well, if that's okay. I think with CPP, it's very much about integrating the child's past experiences with their current affect and behaviour. Sometimes those links haven't been made, so really sort of encapsulating all of those in a story that is age appropriate and that the caregiver can hold as well.
Thanks, Vicky. That's really useful. And I'm not sure of them off the top of my head. Kirsten, I think you might be in a better position around the books, perhaps that Chandra has written that might be useful for participants who might be particularly interested in CPP.
Yes, I can share some of the links in the chat, so I'll go and find them and share them now. So
Wonderful.
there's some wonderful books that are really worth looking at because they help you kind of create the narrative and think about different ways of doing that.
And Kirsten, while I've got you unmuted, I just thought, not necessarily specific to Georgina, but I guess there's a question around, that Georgina's quite distressed and thinking about that could be telling us lots of different things, and just the place for, I guess, not only our multi-dimensional assessment, but the place of other assessments and things around speech and language or occupational therapy, and just, I guess, a comment, I guess, on that perhaps from you, Kirsten, would be useful.
Yeah, no, I think that's incredibly useful to think about, and it's something that we really think about in our work because it's making meaning of a certain behavior, and you want to rule out that there's no other underlying reasons other than trauma in terms of responding to that. So, yeah, speech and language assessments are critical, SROT assessments. So, I'm not sure whether a speech and language assessment was undertaken in part of this treatment or not, but they routinely would be in our work and would be supporting families to link in to other services.
Tam, just something that came to mind, which was my something that I was interested of, so I'm hoping that other participants were. You talked about, the second phase of assessment was to bring Georgina and Maria together for a dyadic session. And Vicky, also please feel free. What are those sessions, I guess, when bringing in those caregivers, how do we think about structuring or not structuring those, or the different things that we bring into the space where we might have that session? What's some of the thinking that informed how it was that we brought Georgina and Maria in together, or generally how we think about those sessions?
Yeah, so we plan with the caregiver, like what objects we might be into the session. So often we have some figurines that might be able to be used to represent family, and that doesn't have to always be people. Actually, this little girl, Georgina, often gravitated to a group of cows, and they kind of illustrated a mummy cow and a baby cow, and other times it was other animals. So bringing in some figurines that can be used as symbols to in their play. We held sessions at the school because it was tricky for this family to get around as they didn't have a car. So that was again a conversation that we had in the initial sessions around where could we hold these sessions. They'd have to be in a place that this little girl felt safe and like she was comfortable as well. So yes, we do hold sessions in the community. We do have offices throughout the areas that we cover, and it depends on the families that we're working with, what kind of works best.
Thanks, Tamara.
And I think that a preparation aspect is really important as well, so that help the caregiver understand that they are observation sessions, so we're not intervening a great deal. So they're sort of prepared for what that's going to look like and how we might introduce ourselves to the child and those sorts of things. So we spend a lot of time in child-focused parent sessions working on those things.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks, Vicky. I think that's really useful to hear. And I guess it's making me think of the planning tool that's part of the guide, and lots of, I guess, those key consideration prompts in that planning tool can help us to think about, the individual planning that needs to happen for every family. And interesting, like, I guess, an extension question that Jackie's just popped on, which I thought was given the sessions were in her education
Childcare, sorry,
space, in her
yeah.
childcare space. Did
Yeah.
you, I guess, I think it's useful and that was obviously another very important space for her that we considered in assessment. But what then did the, I guess, intervention look like with the childcare setting?
Yeah, it was a bit similar to some of the conversations that I'd had with Maria. It was about trying to help them understand what was underlying Georgina's symptoms of distress, things they could do to help support Georgina transition through activities and spaces. So I definitely found it really helpful to give Georgina a lot of a notice when a session was about to end. So, 10 minutes out, letting her know this would be the last activity. I even had a little stop clock running so she could see as well. So it didn't feel like something I was dictating to her, but something that we both were kind of watching. And this was actually something that the childcare staff took on board. So I think they got an egg timer, and that when they were outdoors in particular, because Georgina really did enjoy like being outdoors quite a lot, they would give her warning. They would show her that the egg timer had started, and said that those things also helped support Georgina to transition more smoothly.
Wonderful. Thanks, Tamara. I think from my scrolling through the chat, I think that covers most of the questions. If there was any burning final questions that anyone wanted to pop in there, I can probably we've probably got time for another couple. Whilst you might be mulling over those thoughts, I guess I wanted to just to flag for those of you who might be interested in further training opportunities about trauma-informed practice with infants and caregivers, I'd really encourage you to jump on to the Berry Street website and take a look at the 2023 Infant Mental Health and Wellbeing series. We've got a training coming up in a couple of weeks. It does still have a few spots, just a couple of last spots that are available for anyone who's really keen to jump in this year to some further training. I guess whilst I'm here, I did really want to thank Kirsten, Vicky, and Tamara for participating in the conversation today, and for all the efforts that's gone into preparing for today, and for those of my colleagues who have also contributed to the development of the practice guide itself. Just a reminder to everyone here today, final reminder that we will be making that practice guide available to everyone who's registered. But I'd really encourage you also to feel free to share this on freely with your colleagues, and to direct them also to the recording of today's session if it would be of interest to them. So with no final questions coming through, I did just want to thank everyone for being here today and for participating, for your thoughtful questions and the conversation. And we might close the session here. Thanks, everyone.